Thank you all so much for joining us. As Mark said, I'm Danielle Press and I'm a Commissioner of ASIC. And it's very exciting to have these run in the hybrid format. Unfortunately, I can't be with you today, but I am here where it's very windy, so hopefully my window doesn't blow in and I get covered with rain. If it does, I'll be coming off screen very fast. It's been a little while since we've gathered in this forum, but the interval has provided us with some opportunities to participate in industry events, such as the Regtech Australia Accelerate conference earlier this year, and we were very excited and grateful to be part of that. It does reflect our ongoing commitment to engage with this sector, which is really key to our understanding of the emerging trends and opportunities in Regtech, as well as our role in supporting that innovation. It is without doubt, in my mind, that the potential role of Regtech has only continued to grow in our digitally empowered economy. And regulators and industry alike are considering the various benefits brought by Regtech solutions. They can reduce costs, they can improve regulatory compliance and processes, but we're also aware of the potential technology and innovation as well on the risks of doing so. And we do think that we need to be very careful around that. The rapid advancement in technologies of artificial intelligence are really changing the landscape of financial services. And it's a high priority for us at ASIC to continue to both observe and understand how AI is being applied to firms and the risks as well as the opportunities that those methods are attached to those methods. We have seen the adoption of AI in Regtech, and we've seen a substantial increase in the use of AI across banking, securities, insurance, and other financial services. And we are very aware of the risks that it brings, as well as, again, those great opportunities. Increasing reliance on technology comes with some critical responsibility. We are going to need to be responsible to ensure that there's safe, secure, and ethical use of data, especially given the volumes and the complexity of the data being collected, stored, and analysed. We all know that it's a question of if, not when, we're hacked, and how we respond to those hacks are going to be critically important. All good Regtech solutions will depend on quality data to build effective models and to generate valuable insight for decision making. Garbage in and garbage out continues to be an issue and a problem. So we're very conscious of our role that we play here at modelling an approach to technology that upholds confidence and integrity in the financial services system. And our digital and data strategy roadmap outlines our focus on developing staff capability and continued insights and investment into digital technologies and data to support us becoming effective and efficient regulator and having faster outcomes as well as quality outcomes. Our long-term ambition is to expand the use of advanced analytics and share rich data sets to enable research and innovation, and will be supported by high standards of information security, governance and ethics, as we talked about before. There is nothing more critical than that. In the meantime, we continue to support innovation and Regtech solutions that are helping regulated entities comply with their obligations through our Innovation Hub and our ongoing participation in the Business Research and Innovation Initiative, BRII. I'm very glad that I can use the acronym to that because there's a lot of words. We're very excited to embark on the next proof of concept stage of the BRII Regtech round, which was with the successful entity, which was DHI-AI. We would like to thank ListCorp, DigitalX, Pixstar and Bedrock AI for their participation and efforts in the feasibility study, which produced valuable learnings and insights, and we wish them all the best in their future developments of product. For those who may not be familiar with our program, ASIC's Challenge explores the potential use of technology to help identify and assess poor market disclosure in listed companies, something which is critically important to the ongoing success of our markets here in Australia. An important innovation, and it forms part of our digital and data agenda. DHI-AI will be tasked with developing a technology solution to help ASIC analyse corporate disclosures and assess compliance. This successful solution will be has the potential to transform our ability to harness technology, reduce regulatory burden, also critical, while enhancing market integrity. But we will come to that a little bit more later. So in closing, we have a number of presenters here today from ASIC, AUSTRAC and the Regtech, AUSTRAC, sort of a bit like Star Trek, AUSTRAC and Regtech Association have joined us today to speak on some of the themes that I've touched on here in my opening remarks. And I would like to thank all of our presenters today for their time and continued commitment to this space. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for attending today, both personally and online. Your engagement with us on these things is critically important to foster productive information sharing and discussion. We look forward to delivering more of these forums later in the year and engaging with you in person where possible. And with that, I will hand back to Mark Adams to take you through an update on ASIC.
So, just going to touch on a few things. I don't want to make as much time for other people. So Danielle talked about one of the ways we interact with the RegTech community, and that is through the Innovation Hub as a sort of agency function for the ASIC. So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So we meet with lots of FinTech and RegTech businesses. So that is part of a couple of avenues. One of those is what we call providing informal assistance. And so there's a mechanism for businesses to approach ASIC, and there's a simple form via the Innovation Hub. And some RegTechs aren't quite sure what their business model is, and it might involve the provision of financials or credit service. So depending on their business model, that's where the informal assistance comes in. And it may be that we get a few senior staff and we have a conversation with that business. So you can see there's quite a lot of those kind of meetings. In the last year, there's been like a dozen of them. Then the second avenue is that we're open to meet RegTechs to just hear what they're doing. And so over that time, there's been 200 of those kind of meetings and 50 this year. Now, everyone's busy, so we can't always guarantee who will be at those meetings from ASIC, but at the very least, there will always be people from the Innovation Hub small unit who will be there, gather the information and make that available for people within ASIC. So it's good to know what businesses are doing, where they're approaching things, whether there's issues coming up. So I just wanted to highlight that to you. That is one mechanism of engagement with the RegTech sector. If I could have the next slide, please. So the next thing out of that is a little bit of what we're seeing. And so there's obviously businesses around analytics, and quite a lot of businesses around that. And so that's where they might be getting into the world of possibly getting into financial services, depending on where they are in the provision of the frontline aspect of that. Then there are businesses with governance, everything with helping businesses understand how they operate, their risk management, their compliance arrangements, and that is covering the field of supporting financial service providers and perhaps non-financial service providers. And I suppose that's why there's the crypto service there, because they're on the borderline depending on the nature of their business as to whether they are doing that or not. So governance is another bit of a theme that we're seeing. I mean, trading, many of you are in the business models of monitoring fraud, other forms of risk. So monitoring activity and monitoring market trading within businesses or within various markets is another kind of service that people have seen. And then a number of my staff members have met with businesses who are really excited about digital ID, and they wanted to come in and talk to us about this is where we are, this is what we're doing. And so ASIC is another sort of power user in terms of dealing with people, and digital ID is equally relevant for us in our interactions. So that's an interesting development, and clearly we want to be in a different world for that in how we operate as individuals. So they're just some observations I wanted to give you. If I could have the next slide, please. So Danielle mentioned the BRIE project, so I'll be brief here. We have now entered the second phase of working with DHI and AI, and in fact, we have another meeting with them this afternoon. As Danielle said, the problem that we've identified for this is around corporate disclosure or poor disclosure to the markets. So that's a representative challenge. It raises text analytics, it raises dealing with all forms of media, it raises with models which involve anomaly detection or other forms of things like that. So we're really hoping that this can make progress and deliver a minimum viable product for us. I say all that just so you're not just hearing that and interested, but we're wanting to play back our learnings as we go. So this is a bit of a case study for us. So we've got a storyline we can say. And so you can probably already guess from some of my description of the problem and some of the way of tackling it, there's umpteen issues in that, which we're all grappling with. So we'll have more to say on that in further meetings and so on. And we might have DHIAI come along and have a chat themselves and their perspective. The next slide, please. And I'm just going to finish at the international level. There's always conversations of RegTech and SupTech, and the Global Financial Innovation Network, which is a body of international regulators across sectors. So there's close to like 100 members of this. It's led by the FCA UK. It meets and shares intelligence and information. So the first thing I wanted to let you know about is, and I think we may have mentioned this previously, they are running a green sort of green tech sprint or greenwashing sprint using the FCA's digital sandbox. It was open to anyone, I think, to indicate interest, and I'm not completely sure whether any Australian businesses did so, but I think it's something to keep watching, and there will be updates on that. So that may be of interest to some of you and the work of the FCA digital sandbox. You may say, where's the ASIC Australian digital sandbox? Well, there's lots of things. That's one of the things we have to prioritise what we can do with what we have. So we don't have quite the same thing in this marketplace at the moment, although other agencies do various things depending on the framework they're involved in. So I wanted to mention that to you. The second thing, if I could go to the next slide, just on GFIN, is it did enable regulators to share information around approach to RegTech. And are you able to get the next slide? It's not coming up. So the next slide would tell you that we pulled together information, and there's a report on the GFIN webpage, and some of you may have already seen that. I just wanted to remind people of it. It's an interesting reference piece, I think, if nothing else, where about 15 agencies confirmed that none of them certify RegTech. And there's lots of reasons for that, and that report describes that. One of those is competition and dealing with that. But they all do different ways of interacting and trying to support RegTech, and this report just briefly brings it together. So I think that's a handy thing as a reference piece for people in the audience today. So they're the brief things I wanted to mention, and now I'm going to pass over to my colleague Jo Harper, who leads all things digital at ASIC. She can describe that better, and our own transformation, which will be of interest to you. So over to Jo.
Thanks, everybody. I have a bit of a confession to make. I left my reading glasses at home, so I have some notes, but I won't be able to read them. So let's just see how it goes. Luckily, I wrote the notes last night, so they're still pretty fresh in my mind, so I should be able to cover anything. But I do reserve the right to, towards the end of the presentation, go, oh, there was one other thing that I remember that I wanted to say to you. So as Mark said, ASIC's undergone a little bit of a restructure, many of you will know. And as of the 1st of July, my remit is now I look after the data team, the digital team, the technology team, the cybersecurity team. So they've been brought together, and they've been brought together with the idea that all of those together would enable us to be able to do the kind of transformation that we want to do within ASIC. So today I thought I'd cover a couple of things with you. This is probably the first time I've been to one of these presentations, so if I haven't hit the mark, any feedback afterwards would be really useful. What I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about what our digital transformation is and where we see you being involved. And I also thought I would mention a couple of things that are happening in the moment in government, and a couple of things that you might need to know about if you're doing business with government or doing business with us. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll get to, first of all, why we are embarking on such a transformation. I'm pretty sure everyone in this audience, I don't have to convince anyone here that we need to transform. Look, we know that technology is changing at a rapid pace. We know that the industry that we deal with is very, very technologically mature. And we know that if we don't keep pace with that, that we are, in the words of Joe Longo, our chair, going to fast become irrelevant. So we know that there are things that we need to do to change. So I won't go through all of the various things, except to say that we're well aware of the impetus of why we need to change. So we've come up with what our digital vision is, and if we go to the next slide, thanks Judy. So our digital vision is that by 2030, ASIC will be a leading digitally enabled data-informed regulator. So a couple of things on that. Look, the first thing is why by 2030? Well, we recognise it's a long journey. There's a lot of work that we need to do. I'm also learning about government funding and the time it takes to get money to do things. We're sort of going through that. So it's not a short journey that we're going through. We also deliberately chose the word data informed rather than data driven. A lot of our peer agencies and a lot of you would have heard the term data driven. We're data informed, so data does inform a lot of the things that we do, but there are other things that we take into consideration when we undertake our regulatory activities, and we wanted to make that pretty clear. And can I just say, having read the most recent Robo-Debt Royal Commission report and the recommendations, I'm really glad that we said we were data informed and not data driven. So if I take us to the next slide, in trying to reach that vision, the ASIC senior executive team got together and said, well, what would we look like as an organisation if we were to be that data-informed, digitally enabled leading regulator? And we came up with 7 target states, ambitions. I won't go through all of them, except to say the first few will notice that we have a really, really big focus on making it easy to do business with us. And when I say easy, it's not about lowering our standards, but it is about the recognition that the only people we want to be doing the wrong thing as a regulator are people that are deliberately know they're doing the wrong thing. We don't want people to do the wrong thing by accident because they don't have the right information, because they don't know how to follow our systems. So we're really, really putting a lot of emphasis into that. But the one I wanted to draw your attention to today, with the nice green arrow, my PowerPoint skills have excelled themselves, I think, in putting this lovely green arrow there, is to say that we actively encourage and support the Regtech and SUPTech initiatives where they can help us to meet our regulatory initiatives. And so we've been sort of pretty clear in that to say that we expect that you are going to be able to help us to reach our goals, and we know that we can't do it alone. We actually know that we're going to be needing to draw upon the expertise of our Regtech community and our SUPTech community. So if we go to the next slide, many of you may be aware, I thought it would just be worth letting you know if you're not, that the federal government, the DTA, the Digital Transformation Agency, recently released their draft data and digital government strategy. And it was out for comment, I think, during June and July. I think the comment is now closed, but I'm sure if you're interested in providing commentary, they would be interested in hearing what you've got to say if you haven't heard about it. They had a number of missions that they identified, and they call them action missions. And action mission number 3, I think, is really important, because this is where it talks about the government of the future, and it talks about innovation and picking up on the kind of things that we ourselves are seeing in our own digital strategy. So if we go to the next slide. So I thought I'd just draw sort of 2 areas to explore, and I know the Fireside chat that Deb and Will are having later on is going to explore in more detail the generative AI and the way that is. It's interesting because, and I'm sure Deb will touch on this, that it's gained a lot of prominence since ChatGPT came out, but we know that the technology has been there for some time. ChatGPT got a really nice wrapper, but we know that it's been around, so people have been thinking about it, and we certainly at ASIC have been thinking about how we use AI and generative AI for some time. Some of you might be aware that the government commissioned a rapid information report, which came out in March. I think Dr. Genevieve Bell was one of the authors on that, and they posed some challenges to the Australian industries to say, have we got sufficient compute power, appropriately skilled practitioners, scientific expertise, and a workforce development strategy. You'll notice that my long side is a lot better than my short side. My reading glasses aren't so good, but I couldn't read that miles. Perhaps I should have just put my speech up on here and I would have been able to read it. I wanted to also talk to you a little about that within ASIC. We know that responsible AI is challenging. We know it's hard, but we also know that we have to do it. And we have spent some time, we set up an AI policy, and which we based that on the Australian AI ethics principles, which were released by DISRA. We're working through the framework of how that is going to work, and to make sure that the only AI that we use in a responsible way. And of course, like everybody, we read the findings of the Robo-Debt Royal Commission quite closely. We understand that a lot of that is not actually about AI, and it's more around governance and how people work, but we've taken on board the recommendations that are in that. And so you can see that I've mentioned that. And the last thing we know is that we think the regulation around AI is very likely, and many of you may be aware that DISRA they released a consultation paper supporting responsible AI discussion paper, and comments closed today. Sorry, everybody, if you wanted to provide commentary, they closed today, so you might want to nip back to your office and have a look at it if you thought that you might want to provide commentary on that. So if we go to the next slide. The other area I think of interest is the cyber security area, and of course, this is only continues to grow in importance, and you will all be aware that the federal government takes cyber security incredibly seriously. Some of you may be aware of the Essential 8. If you're not aware of it and you want to do business with the Australian government, I think it's really important to make yourself aware of what that Essential 8 is. I won't go through it today, but you can just Google Essential 8 and you will find it, or ChatGPT Essential 8 indeed, and they will tell you all about it. That sets the foundation, basic, what I kind of call the hygiene principles for the Australian government and for those that want to deal with us. And if you are dealing with a government agency and doing any work for them, many of you may be aware of the IRAP assessment process, which is really important as well. And that process effectively makes sure that as a company, you meet those Essential 8 and you're a company that we can kind of do business with. So agencies that are what we call protected, that deal with highly sensitive information, if you're going to be working with us, you'll need to meet those IRAP assessments. So it's worthwhile looking into that. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about any of those if you've got questions about how you can do that. So that was really all I wanted to cover today. As I said, we had a short period of time, just wanted to give you a bit of a taste, see what hit the mark and what doesn't potentially hit the mark, and you can give feedback to the team and they can absolutely guide me if I'm lucky enough to be able to present in future. And no questions out at the end, is that how we're running it? Yep. Thanks, Mark. Keeps on track.
So many thanks, Jo, and I appreciate Jo coming along today. We just simply wanted to tell you a little bit of our own story, and so you probably can all relate to that, and where it fits into that. We're happy to keep doing that. So just in the interest of time, I think you may have some queries. I'm just going to remind people, please send any questions in via the chat and we'll get to those. But I think in the interest of time, so that Leanne can manage her time, we'll give the floor over to Leanne King from AUSTRAC, who's going to give us a little bit of a perspective from there. So really pleased you're here. Thanks, Leanne.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Judy and AUSTRAC, ASIC as well. And thank you for your flexibility. I'm actually off to Orange for a school rugby team match tomorrow morning. So I need to jump in the car and drive 4 hours for that, for them to possibly lose. I would like to begin today also by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, sea and waters where I live and work. And from where I join you today is the Wallumedegal people from the Durag Nation. I pay my respects to the Wallumedegal people, elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who are joining us today. I am Liang King. I am the Director of AUSTRAC's Industry and Education and Outreach team, and just wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about AUSTRAC's AML reform work and future engagement with our Regtech partners. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you may have heard recently about the proposed reforms to Australia's anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regime. The proposed reforms include extending the existing AML-CTF legislation to capture tranche 2 high-risk entities. So that includes lawyers, accountants, trusts, company service providers, real estate agents, and dealers in precious metals and stones. So the reform also aims to modernise and clarify the regime in line with international standards and best practice, reduce complexity and regulatory burden on industry, ensure the regime remains fit for purpose, and harden Australian businesses and sectors against exploitation by serious organised criminals. Following the announcement, a public consultation on proposed reforms has commenced. So the government has invited industry to make submissions on the proposed reforms set out in the first of 2 consultation papers published on the Attorney General's website. These submissions have closed, but the second paper will be published in a few months' time. So the AUSTRAC team are currently reviewing these comments, and insights will be critical in helping to shape the reforms and ensuring our AML-CTF regime continues to protect the financial system. The reform will also consider the findings of the Financial Action Task Force Mutual Evaluation of Australia in a couple of years, the statutory review of the AML-CTF framework. So the gap in coverage of Tranche 2 entities creates an enhanced risk of criminal exploitation of Australia's financial system. The inclusion of these industries in the AML-CTF regime will close the gap and strengthen of the integrity of the regime. Out of 200 jurisdictions, Australia is now only of 5, alongside China, Haiti, Madagascar, and the United States, that do not regulate Tranche 2 entities. So this work is being led by the Attorney General's Department with the support of AUSTRAC. So why I wanted to talk about that today is for the regtechs among us here, there is a lot of opportunity going forward on assisting our new regulated population. A lot of these will be new to AML regulation and are small businesses. So it's time to think about what solutions can be put in place for these cohorts. Next slide, please. Thank you. Secondly, for those who have worked with AUSTRAC previously, we will be presenting an event for regtechs, which are new or established on AML obligations. The objective of this event will allow regtechs to hear from AUSTRAC, our reporting entities, law enforcement, on AML obligations and the challenges that reporting entities have in complying with our AML-CTF Act. We are still working on the finer details, and more information will be released at an upcoming RegTech Association event. So we will continue to work with the RegTech Association, and we want to support our reporting entities and regtechs in building solutions to fulfil their AML obligations. Regtechs do have the opportunity to contact AUSTRAC if you would like to have an engagement session with us. The contact email is just there on the slide. And I just wanted to talk about the expectations for regtechs when building solutions for our reporting entities. So it's just what's mentioned on the screen. To demonstrate an understanding of Australia's AML-CTF framework, to understand the products and services provided by the client, as well as the money laundering and counterterrorism financing risk and operations they face, challenges, to understand the gaps a client may have in their meeting their regulatory obligations and potential regtech solutions, to be able to clearly explain the solution to your client, including its limitations and extent to what support you have to meet their obligations, to ensure you understand your client's needs, their obligations, and what your solution addresses, for it to be developed for a jurisdiction other than Australia, to meet the requirements of our framework, to ensure your client has ongoing support to implement this solution, and lastly, to keep up to date with relevant AUSTRAC information, industry trends, and legislative changes. That is it from me today. I just wanted those, a few minutes just to go through those things. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take some now, or I'm also happy for Judy or ASIC to feed them through to me at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. Just checking people can hear me. Yep.
Yep.
Thank you, Leanne. So I've just been looking at the chat. I can't see any queries there, so there's still the opportunity. I'm going to ask in Sydney. You can yell out if you've got a query, and I'll repeat it if there is something. I don't think we've got any chat messages at the moment that I could see. So Leanne, I really appreciate you being here. I think it's great that AUSTRAC do often come to these liaison forums. I think it's good that we can try to show this, whole of government interest in the regtech, and certainly as relevant to the financial sector as possible. And I think your little description of some of the points for regtechs to bear in mind in the AML CTF are really equally applicable in relation to any problem that, for instance, business may be confronting in the financial services sector as well. That familiarity of the context within which the regtech and the business itself is working together. So I think thank you for emphasising that for us, and wish you well, not only with this work, but also for your travel to Orange for the weekend. Stay warm.
Stay warm. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you very much. So I'm just going to check, Joe Harper, are you able to remain, or would you like me? Okay, but I am going to continue to ask if people had any queries for Joe, myself, or Danielle. If Danielle's still here, I can see Danielle's there. So if you did have any queries or comments, please put them in the chat and we can come to those at the end. So I think I'm going to provide now the opportunity for Deb. I think you're going to come up first, are you, Deb, and do a bit of an update, and then Deb and Will are going to shoot the breeze on generative AI and regtech. So look forward to that. So over to you, Deb. You come.
Thanks very much, everybody. And if I could also just add my acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land in which we are meeting today, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to acknowledge any First Nations people here today. Thank you very much to ASIC for having me, to Commissioner Press, Mark, Judy, Joe, and also hi to Leanne, who we also work very closely with at AUSTRAC. So thanks very much. I'm just going to spend a few minutes going through a bit of an update from the RegTech Association's perspective, and then I'm going to ask Will to join me, and I'll introduce him in a second. Could we go to the next slide? Thanks, Judy. We can go to the next one after that. So I just thought what might be worthwhile for those of you that are either online or in person in Sydney or Melbourne, a little bit about where the association is going to be focused. And that is really around 4 key things over the next 3 years. And they are going to be to facilitate connections to drive commercial outcomes, to educate and showcase to promote the industry, to explore and expand new opportunities in new markets or segments, and also to encourage and facilitate global investment into the regtech sector. And whilst there's some more granular things below the line there, I think what's super important is that we have not changed our mission or our vision, which remain as to create a global centre of excellence for regtech, and also to do what we can to accelerate adoption. So we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Judy. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update. I also wanted to let you know that I'm joined by my colleague, Alison Shapira, here in Sydney today. So if anybody has any questions, she's the right person that you can go to as your go-to person for all the good questions that you have. So we, after the first 5 years of the association, it became obvious to us, and a lot of what we heard ASIC talk about before was some of the global connectivity. It became obvious to us that we actually had more of a global role to play. So not just a role in Australia, but a role to play globally. So what some of you may have noticed, there's a subtle change in our brand, and we have made that a more global brand. We're still called the RegTech Association, but you will notice that our URL is now .org rather than .org.au. And it doesn't mean that we've removed our commitment to Australia, but it is certainly to say that we are now a global organisation. And in fact, about 25 to 30% of our members now come from elsewhere. We spent some time in Europe and in the UK in June, and what I can report as a result of that, RegTech remains very, very high on the global agenda. We are deeply engaging with regulators both in Australia and offshore, and we spent some great quality time with the FCA and indeed 6 other sector agnostic regulators. And when we hear about AUSTRAC expanding their remit, the same can be said. There was a lot of interest from other industry sectors and regulators across those sectors in the UK. We're really trying to work more deeply with financial institutions to unpack the benefits of RegTech. And just a little bit about what you should expect to see from us over the next little while. Certainly we'll be playing a very active role in the Singapore FinTech Festival, so you can watch out for Alison and I there. I will be speaking at the festival. We will continue to drive the showcase activities online, and many of you may have attended those activities. Over the last 3 years, we've had 19,000 people from 85 countries attend those programs. So you can see the level of interest there is in what we are doing. And we've spent a little bit of time redesigning some of the work. So one of the great things about being a small and nimble organisation is that we're able to cut our cloth every year. And we have recognised that the industry is demanding a different shape and form. So instead of us doing big, large-scale events, what we are seeing is more demand for more focused discussions. So you should look forward to some of those in the future. And the last point on there is about our Regtech Matters program. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk a little bit about that today was we have reshaped the way that we are doing that program. So instead of simply designing a program and bringing that to you via a webinar, what we took some time to do was a couple of weeks ago was got together with a group of industry experts, and we started to talk a little bit about generative AI. Now, we're just on the very beginning of this journey, but it did occur to me that it would be a great opportunity to share some of the learnings that we took away from that session that we did. And so I am joined today by Will Liang, who's one of the board directors of the Regtech Association. But in his day job, he's actually the executive director at the MA Financial Group, who are an asset manager. He's recently been speaking on generative AI across a number of different platforms, including the Alliance for Innovative Regulation in the US. He also presented on this at ASIC's recent digital advisory panel meeting. He recently led that roundtable that I was talking about, which was at Chatham House. So I won't say who was at the roundtable, but it was a very robust discussion. And Will also sits on the Financial Services Technology and Innovation Expert Group. And so I'm going to ask Will to join me on the stage, and we're going to have a little bit of a fireside chat around generative AI. So just bear with me as I cross the floor. Will, I might get you to sit here. And I'm going to sit here.
Hello.
Judy, and I'm deliberately going to face Judy here so you can just keep me honest on timing. If I'm talking too much, wave at me. So welcome, Will, and I'll just preface the discussion with a few of the key points that came out of our roundtable. I think there was a general consensus from participants at that roundtable that there should be a focus on the quality and the trustworthiness of the content that is being generated by AI. There's also a big difference between the AI that is being used in private domains and what has now become public via the internet. And there was also an interesting discussion about the trust premium and the theory of trusted brands, how content will be commercialised and paid for in the future, and the augmentation of content with a human overlay. So I thought I would ask Will a couple of burning questions, and really looking forward to his thoughts on this. One of the things that somebody raised at our roundtable was, why is Gen AI like plastic?
Look, Deb, I think this kind of, I've heard many different versions of this kind of metaphors, I must say. All very recently, one of them is AI is like nuclear bomb, AI is like nuclear energy, AI is like electricity, like fire, like a baby playing with fire. The most latest one is generative AI is like McKinsey, the consulting company. So I won't tell you why, just go Google it, you'll find a pretty good story. That's right, that's why I'm not telling story, but Google it, and by Google, I mean use Google Bard, not the search. Yeah. I think it's actually quite simple. The key point here, Deb, is we're really talking about AI, generative AI can bring significant benefit to human race, but also at the same time, there's significant risks, right? If not used well. Now, I actually recently posted on LinkedIn a survey, basically very simple 3 questions, right? Is generative AI a hype? Number 1, hype. Is it a groundbreaking technology with risks, or is it a huge danger to humanity? Don't touch it at all, right? So 1, 2, 3. A quick show of hands in the room. Who thinks it's a hype? AI is a hype. Groundbreaking technology with significant risks. Okay, good. And don't touch it. No, so that's very consistent with the survey I done online. So not more than 90% of people said AI is a groundbreaking technology without risks.
Yeah, very good. And I think the person that made the comment about the plastic was really referring to plastic is got many great uses, but it's also very bad, as it turns out, for the environment. So it's that analogy which I thought was quite clever. Can you unpack a little bit for us? You know, we just referred to the issue of trust and also about quality of the information. I know there's lots of concerns about what information people are pulling out of ChatGPT, but I did actually pop in there what is Regtech, and it actually gave me a very, very good description of Regtech. I didn't disagree with anything that it said, but tell us a little bit about, and can you give us some examples of the quality issue and then perhaps the trustworthiness of the information?
Look, I think so far my experience has been generally good. I believe that's kind of most people's experience, right? Part of saying it's not hype, it's not a hype because people use it and people feel, you know, this is something real. I'll give you a personal example. Recently, I had this conversation with my son. He went to bed. He's 10-year-old. He went to bed sleeping, and I opened his door and I found out he was playing game, a Roblox apparently. He just woke himself up and played game in the middle of the night. I was so angry at the time, right? I think people can understand. I was so about to yell at him and to ban him completely from the game, right? Completely from the game. But I can't stop myself. Then I asked ChatGPT, in this particular scenario, what should I actually do? The suggestion was, you know, in this case, don't ban him completely. Have a conversation with him. Maybe there's some benefit about playing the game. Anyway, so the whole my point is, you know, it did give me this kind of advice, which I thought, looking back, was pretty good advice, much better than me being, you know, angry and ban him completely from the game.
It was better than my advice to you, which was take the bloody phone away from him and tell him to go to sleep.
Yeah, that's right. So this I try to use ChatGPT as much as possible, and I know there's a lot of conversation about in business, in different industry, about, you know, different business cases. I personally actually think the biggest benefits at the moment is individual productivity, right? So I encourage everyone to use as much as possible, right? The productivity gain you see on a daily basis is significant. Hallucination is a massive problem. So, you know, sometimes we do see different wrong answers, and very confidently wrong answers from ChatGPT, from Bard, from other tools. There are tools. ChatGPT is just one of the generative AI tools, right? I think people are familiar with Bard. There's a new one called Perplexity.ai, which I start to use more and more. A benefit of that is it gives you the reference where did they find the answer to the question, right? So you can actually click into the article. So I thought that was pretty useful. My personal view is I think hallucination is a solvable problem when we have better and better data, right? So at the moment, ChatGPT is trained on the entire internet data, which include forums like Reddit, right, which has a whole bunch of rubbish on there, along with good things. But I think as we use better and better data to train the large language models, I think hallucination is a solvable problem.
Okay, how are we going for time? Because I've got 3 more questions.
You've got 5-7 minutes.
Great, excellent. So you just talked about people and in the opening remark, I talked about the overlay of humans augmenting with AI. There's danger in where we just put all the trust in computers. And often we hear about when people talk about the deployment of Regtech, or people are going to lose their jobs. But in actual fact, we need the computers. We actually need the people as well. The people will then have higher order tasks to do instead of some of the grunt work that some of the Regtech solutions can bring. But I'm just wondering, is there, you know, what is the balance? What is the balance going to look like? What is that overlay? What does that augmentation look like of computers and humans?
I've spoken to many people about this topic, and also, you know, generative AI in general. Very often, the first reaction I got is, "This is amazing." After using ChatGPT, this is absolutely amazing. Oh my God. Second reaction is, "Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job." If you look at a study which was done not long ago in the United States, talking about ATM machines, right? So when ATM machines was invented and rolled out, there was a massive concern about job loss in terms of bank tellers, right? But if you look at the actual data, what they found is the bank tellers actually didn't decrease, actually increased as ATM machines were rolled out. So what actually ended up happening was each bank branch in the United States usually need 26 tellers for each branch. After ATM, that become 12, so almost halved, right? More than halved actually. But the cost to install each branch became so much cheaper. So United States actually more than double the number of branches in there. So I think that I'm not necessarily comparing generative AI tools with ATM machines, but I think the key thing is, as human, we got to keep learning these tools and really get ourselves up to speed in terms of generative AI development, and that really will help us in terms of you know being employed and job losses, etc. Microsoft actually put it really well. I love this point they did. So they named their product a co-pilot. I think that's a really good metaphor, right? AI is a co-pilot. It can help you with many different things. At the end of the day, you are the captain yourself, right? A captain need to make the final decision as human.
Yeah, well done. Well, my last question is one which I hope will excite our regulatory peers. So what might be keeping regulators awake at night when they're worried about things like consumer protection and safety and stability of the system? So what are your thoughts around that?
I was going to say allow neighbors doing late night parties. But yes, I certainly think from a consumer protection perspective, scam is a major issue at the moment. You know, to your point earlier, we are at very early stage of generative AI journey. But this is an area I think we have to pay a lot of attention to as a society. You know, things like deepfake has been around for a long time, as Joe mentioned earlier, this whole principle of generative AI. But I think in the last 18 months, what has transpired is the computing power required to make a very seriously good deepfake has dramatically reduced. The sample data required to train a deepfake has dramatically reduced. I think if you look at 18 months ago, you would need hours of voice sample to actually train a good voice data. But now a few minutes can give you a really good voice sample, right? So my concern has always been, you know, if my 10-year-old son gave me a call, you know, tomorrow saying, "Dad, I got kidnapped. Can you deposit 100K in the next 10 minutes? You know, what should I do?" I don't know. Now, I think a few points here. Detecting AI fake is actually quite a difficult thing to do. Not sure whether anyone read the news, but recently OpenAI actually took down their AI detecting tool. So they had one, but it's not accurate. So they actually took it down, right? it's actually very, very difficult, or getting more and more difficult to detect deepfakes. So I think there's an element of content provenance in play, as in so for content created in the future, there's a role about how we can make sure content is authentic or content is AI. So clearly labeled from a transparency perspective. I think that's quite important. And on top of that, once that's done, how do we have a architecture or internet infrastructure to support that? Right? Image on Twitter, we can clearly see this is a AI generated image, or this is a human generated image. I think those kind of things is quite important. But this is a very important topic. I don't think we've really got our head around this as a society just yet.
Yeah, for sure. It's still emerging, but it's important that we keep having this discussion. Well, I think we're at time. Thank you very much, Will. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you to Mark.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. I'm going to ask you to stay there, Deborah and Leanne. Will, with your mics. Joe Harper's coming up with me, and I think I've seen one message come through, and I'll get to that shortly. So I'm going to remind people, if you have a query or a comment, use the chat and put it in there. And I might ask the Sydney room if they want to yell in my ear, and we'll go that route as well. But please, if you've got a query or comment or observation, you want to add one. There is one here, and this one's around making use of AI to meet regulatory requirements. So imagine someone used it and had, for financial reporting purposes, and there was inadequacies in what came through. Where would this go? So to me, this is an illustration of some of the things you were just chatting about, Will, about the use of technology and tools in undertaking your activity. I'll pause there in case you wanted to add something, but I might ask my ASIC colleagues if they wanted to make an observation too. So, Will, ASIC colleagues first, Will?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
I'm happy to make some comments on it. Look, I think anyone that has, and I know I keep banging on about it, but read the RoboDebt will know that there's a responsibility if you're using some forms of AI that you understand the transparency of it and you understand what is in it and how it's making those decisions. I think they talk about, and in fact our AI principles talk about transparency and explainability. So I think there is an obligation on any tools that you use to undertake your work, that you understand what you're using. And I think it is going to be difficult as you move into the AI world and people are using tools. For example, if they use Copilot Microsoft Copilot to make some decisions, they are under an obligation to make sure that they understand exactly how Copilot's made those decisions. And we talk in ASIC about having the human in the loop, so that the final decision process is actually done by a human who assesses all the information that's provided. So in the early stages, my suggestion would be, if you're relying on AI to meet your regulatory obligations, you would want to be checking very carefully what that AI is generating. But if anyone has a different opinion from ASIC, feel free. I'm not a lawyer. I will put the disclaimer.
That's a great
technology.
No, but it sounded very sensible to me. But I'm just going to ask Danielle, did you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I think Joe's absolutely right. Like, it ultimately, it needs to be right. So if the AI is creating the wrong outcome, be it a reporting outcome or a consumer harm, because it's not actually an accurate AI, or it's built in a way that is creating unintended outcomes, then that's a problem. And the law is actually technology agnostic as to how we get from A to B. It just has to be compliant. So there's no excuse. The machine did it and I didn't understand it. That's just not going to be an acceptable excuse, I don't think, from either an ASIC point of view or a court point of view.
Thanks, Danielle. Will, did you want to add something?
Look, I think you answered that question really well, Joanne and Danielle. The only thing I'd like to add is recently there was the EU Act, EU AI Act, that was discussed in the EU Parliament, and one of the key requirements there is the transparency requirement. As in, if you do use AI in your product, you have to make it very, very clear to the consumers or to the then consumer of the product. And the other thing, kind of in the similar vein, is copyright. If you trained your model on copyrighted product, you must declare that. I think that's a That's an ongoing law, ongoing discussion in the EU at the moment.
Yeah, there's any number of issues. I mean, just two other quick things I'd probably observe. You gave your sons, I mean, the advice about receiving advice, what to do with your son. You know, so that's a power and a tool consumers can use for all sorts of things. And the direct asking of information for perhaps financial advice and other forms of advice around their financial activities, that's going to be a really interesting challenge. And who is the provider and has the controls of that in those circumstances, and let alone then perhaps financial service providers making use of that tool as a co-pilot as described in the provision of service as well. So they're all live issues, but I think in the end, you're still accountable for what you provide. So there's a lot still to be, you know, to reflect on in that context. Now, I haven't seen any other messages. I'm going to give people one more last chance, but meanwhile, I'm just going to ask my colleagues, is there anything else they would like to observe on or comment on at the moment? No? So I'm just checking, there is a new, no, and I'm going to just then maybe wrap up. So I want to thank all the presenters today and thank you for that fireside chat. I really appreciate that on a really interesting topic. I think there is an opportunity for anyone who's here today listening in person or virtually. We welcome any feedback on these sessions, how they can be useful, more useful for you. So I think the easiest way to do that is go to the ASIC site and look up Innovation Hub, and there's an email address. You can always come back and say, here are some ideas. I always appreciate Deborah on behalf of the Regtech Association taking the spot and having a moment, but the invitation is there for anybody, anyone in the sector. If they said, hey, this is an idea, wouldn't mind leading a conversation on this or something like that, so you can use this environment as well within boundaries, but use this environment as well as an opportunity to stimulate conversation on all things Regtech. So there's an invitation for you. So thank you to everybody. Thank you for your time, and a big thank you to Judy Yu, who has put this all together and has been running around just making everything work here as well. So thank you to Judy and all the best. And it's been great to see people in the office as well here in Sydney and Melbourne. So thank you. All the best.